topic of the talk is creating visual identity for branding, right? So I thought we could start with talking about how you as a stylist and a creative director would define having a strong visual identity for a brand. What does it really mean for a brand to have a strong visual identity?
For me personally, because when I was doing styling for the brand, I was always taking like suggestions and guidelines from other experts who were previously in the brand, whether it was the brand owner, a designer, or in many cases, magazine will give you the brief, and then you have to translate that brief into a visual identity. And there was a very little room to make changes as a stylist. You just had to follow what has been given to you as a brief. Uh, so when I realized that okay, it's better for me to understand the brand from the core, or the collection from the core, and take my language along with it and make it very unique for the brand, is where I decided that styling is just not cutting it for me, and I have to take a further plunge into becoming a creative director, or sort of like creating an identity for the brand via visual communications, campaigns, etc. So it was very important for me to understand the product itself, and what the brand has previously done, uh, what are they aiming to become, and along the way, of course, smaller things like what budget we have, what we can spend to create a certain identity, what is the immediate goal, and if you're trying to tell a story uh, which is short term, and if we are telling this story, then how we can run it through for multiple more collections without it being stale or boring. So my process has always been thinking about like 5 to 6 campaign altogether, and how I can start a language which can translate into a larger story, and not just okay, let's do this right now, which is cool and amazing and trendy, and then next season we are completely disconnecting from what we've done previously and not take that story forward. So it's almost like a larger narration once you build, and you start like uh, addressing small perspective and points which each campaign. So the language remain large, and you just pick up those smaller points by understanding the product.
Let's just dial it back for 1 second. That's of course how you would help a brand achieve a brand identity, right? But let's just talk about what the objective of having a strong brand identity is in terms of visuals. Like, how does it help a brand have identity, in your opinion?
So I personally feel that there are so many, sorry.
I'm sorry. Students, you all need to strictly make sure that your microphones are on silent. And if we find any students whose microphones are not on silent and you cause any disturbances, I'm afraid I will have to knock you out from this webinar.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, Kshitij, please continue.
Yeah. So to answer to Aishwarya's questions, like I think there are so many designers and so many brands almost aiming and targeting the same consumer group. And what happens generally, the story of the brand gets lost because of when they don't know how to communicate their story to the audience. And it's somewhere between sales and the product that you have to build up that specific identity for a particular brand, so the brand sort of stands out amongst the crowd, and also have a kind of language the consumer can connect to. So each time you see a visual or a language or a story, you know that story is of a certain brand or a particular brand, and that story has to be either consistent or something very specific which is core of the brand, and other brand cannot easily adapt to it, and almost very specific and special to the brand. And when you create that language, and if other brand try to create the same language, you can see and tell that okay, that is the language of this particular brand, and this is how it came about. So telling the whole story and reaching a conclusion is just not about creating great campaign, it's also the cause they stand for, the story of the owner, the story of the product, why it has started, and where they want to go in the future, and what is the consumer can get from it apart from just buying the product, but how can they be a part of the larger community, which is the whole brand consumer and everyone involved in the brand. And telling that story right now especially is very important, because that justifies just not the cause or why the brand stand, but also it justifies the price point of the brand. It justifies the where they are selling from, and just overall perspective of it, that a consumer can connect to personally, and sort of have a reason why I'm buying this brand and not buying another brand which is sort of competitive to it or in the same product category. So that was like basically why the brand should have a specific identity, just to stand out in a very small, in a simpler term, just to stand out in the crowd
Yeah, and
and
actually
justify this.
yeah, it's even more important now because of the visual excess that we're surrounded by, right? Everything is driven by visuals. Instagram has taken over our lives. We're constantly looking at imagery all the time.
Yeah.
And it becomes then doubly important for a brand to be able to hold your attention for that little while and, create that recognizability, right? Which is, I think it's really hard to do. And there are actually very few
Yeah.
brands, in my opinion, who have managed to get there, who have managed to create such a strong identity across seasons, across multiple campaigns, where you can look at an image and say, okay, this belongs to this brand.
To this particular brand. Yeah.
It's so hard, and so few have done it.
Yeah.
What would you say as a stylist, just taking off from that, like what are the biggest challenges? I know that, first of all, the idea of creating something new when it seems like everything has been done. Like what has not been done, right? We have seen so much branding, so much selling, so many fashion campaigns, so many editorials. It almost feels like we've seen it all. So how do you then create something that's still unique? What are the challenges?
So in terms of creating something unique, so I personally feel, and I think from last couple of years, we are seeing a lot of collaboration work happening.
Yeah.
And not just brands with other brands, but brands with certain creators. So for example, me and my team, like so I have a very particular kind of work from last 2 years, which of course a lot of brand has made me build that kind of work for my portfolio. So so a brand whose identity might be, they might not be clear with what they are right now, so they can collaborate with an artist or a photographer or a stylist, or maybe another brand completely different from what they stand for, and then together they can come and mix their DNA, mix their aesthetic, and create something completely new and different. So that's an easy way out, in a way that you can, without disturbing your DNA and without getting into a complete sort of change of identity, you can take that small risk every season and create that changing of identity. But as I said, for me, when I work with someone, it's very, very important, and generally for a brand, it's very important to make it, to be very, very clear what they stand for and what is their story, and know how to translate it to the team, whether they are working with writers, they are working with creative agencies, they are working with stylists, or even models and hair and makeup artists, to tell them what they are, and for them to understand that. Because in my experience, a lot of designers and a lot of smaller brands, they don't even know what they stand for.
That's
And they come up with a lot of references from other brands, but when you ask them, okay, but what is this which you have which no one else has, and then they get really stuck. So for me, that conversation, if that conversation is very clear, and it's a very clear conversation in terms of, oh no, this is not who we are, this is not the girl or the man who we aim to serve, and we are particularly standing up for this cause. So overall, if someone can really give me a, not a visual per se, but like a vocal idea of what the brand is, and then I can set a parameter, okay, this is what I have to present, and I can't deviate from that main message, but then how to push the border, remaining, keeping that message really strong and similar. I mean, for Aishwarya also, I mean, I'm sure when you were working with a publication, and ELLE at that time has a very strong voice, and to join your voice with that voice was very, you can all see that it was very strong. All the covers had a very strong message. The girls on the cover, or the people on the cover, had a really strong message, and it was going into a direction. So even like, I wanted to ask you as well the similar question, that when you join such a massive legacy such as a publication or ELLE, and then you have to come into a place and not be lost, and make sure that your sort of identity remains and mix up with a larger identity. And the second part of the question is that when you transfer, like when you shifted from ELLE to working with smaller or brands, which is completely different scene from publication, so how did you create that story for that brand, and then make it, of course, like understand that story and make it translate that to the audience well?
So ELLE was, it was strange because it was challenging, but also not. So before ELLE, I'd worked at Vogue for 5 years. So I was very much like I very much had the Vogue DNA in me. So when I moved then to Elle, it was the challenge of setting it apart from a magazine like Vogue, because the Elle reader is different. She's younger. We have a much wider readership in terms of demographic, in terms of, socioeconomics. So to me, and I think this actually will apply to you as well when you're working with a brand, it became about, I mean, typically a magazine is a reflection of the editor, that's eventually what happens.
Yeah.
And to me, the fashion industry, because I don't come from a fashion background. I've been in the industry for a long time, but I haven't studied fashion. I don't have a fashion degree. So to me, what I wanted from the industry as an outsider was more inclusivity. I wanted the fashion industry to be less kind of snobby, less you can't fit with us, a lot more inclusive of different kinds of people, different kinds of style, and to really have an opinion and a voice. Because at the end of the day, we were talking to young women, and it should be, I think, a magazine, or what I wanted the magazine to be was a safe space for young women to talk about anything they wanted to talk about difficult things, to talk about sexuality, to make the Hello?
I can hear you, Aishwarya, but I can't see you now.
Okay. Yeah. So to make the conversation much larger than fashion, because, also the fashion industry can kind of feel like a bubble. Sometimes you feel like we're completely divorced from everything that's happening in the real world.
Yeah.
And, and I wanted us to really live and inhabit the real world. So to me, that was what the magazine, what I wanted the magazine to stand for. So then, I hired a team of, great writers and stylists who reflected that, who
totally,
who brought their own kind of individual voice, and just so that we could become a space where we were talking about things that no one else was talking about. So yeah, for me, that's what it was. And actually coming back to what you were saying, I wanted to ask you, because designers, they may know in their head what their brand is about. They may know what their aesthetic is. They may know who their customer is. But it may be very difficult for them to communicate that to a creative consultant like yourself, to say that, I mean, they may have some references, but it might be difficult for them to put into words that, this is who, especially as a young designer who's starting out.
Yeah.
This is something I faced because, when I moved from magazines to digital content, I made that move because, the print industry was suffering badly, and it made sense to make the jump to digital because we were doing it.
Yeah,
we were doing it for the magazine anyway. It just made sense to do that then for brands and bring that editorial sensibility to brands. But I found that brands typically, they don't know what they want or who they are. I mean, how do you navigate that? Because especially as a young designer, it's difficult.
So when we do the meeting with the brand, it's either two ways. One is either you clearly know who you are and what you are. Like, for example, the brands like Raw Mango, they clearly know who the brand was. And without even hearing from a brand itself, I knew, knowing the brand from certain amount of time, that, okay, this is the brand and this is what they stand for. And if you can't do that, if you're really new or your product is something which is not very special, specific to a category, then you have to trust an expert and give them the freedom. In that case, I attach myself much earlier from the collection stage. So if they can't explain, then it's my duty to understand from the beginning what they're doing. And then in the process of the collections going on, from the time they're selecting the fabric, the process, what is selling more, what pieces are selling more, and get into the whole circle of the brand. And then you say that, okay, I personally think I work with a couple of brands, and I can say it now after working 4 years, 3 years as a consultant, that now I sort of understand, especially the designer area and fashion. And I'm still trying to understand hospitality and other product line in the same way I understand fashion. And then you can tell them that, knowing this doesn't exist out there, and this can be a really strong language you can carry forward for a few years and few collection. And I see this is the unique point. And sometimes they don't have any unique point. Sometimes they are someone, they don't have any special thing.
Yeah.
But when you start yourself from the beginning, you can tell them that, listen, you have to make this product very specific and talk about this product more, or you have to involve a new thing to the system which fits your brand and fits your system, but you don't have it because that can become your hero product or that can become your identity. So I have initiated sometime contacting an NGO and creating certain product for a brand which is coming straight
Wow.
from the ground up, or like it could be certain small finishes which they don't know, which doesn't exist. Because what happens, as a designer, you are actually in a big bubble, and
Mm.
fortunately as a stylist you see a lot of designer outfits from the beginning. You
Yeah.
meet a lot of brand, you talk to a lot of people, so you know how to differentiate one from the other, where designer don't have the luxury to sort of put 20 garments on a rack and see
Yeah.
everyone's finishes and outfit and the fabric detail. And I was like, no. So when I was working for Etho, it was one of the things which the process which we were following was that, okay, there's so many menswear brands. They were doing simple, great quality product,
Yeah.
and
Good.
the brand,
Good.
beautiful product. And their idea was to not do something which has been done before, of course, which every single brand wants.
Yeah.
But then when I saw the product, I was just like, okay, this is, I've never seen such beautifully finished product in India and the fabric and technique done before. And
Yeah.
I think a young person or someone who is looking to buy trend, which generally Indians, like we are, like I am also like, what is trendy, what is cool, what is different,
Hmm.
that crowd might not be attracted to your crowd. And Amit, the owner of the brand, had a vision of putting it on people who really understand the quality of the fabric and understand the value of it. So we automatically created language which is like more interactive, intellectual crowd, which is might
Yeah.
not be a fashion or fashion influencer. It could be a writer, it could be an architect, it could be a guy who is like older in the age. So we found out while seeing the product. So a lot of time you don't, no one has anything, you have to introduce a new idea to them. And
Yeah.
there is somewhere, this is sometimes very difficult because in India still we don't have those massive fashion houses or like a larger team perspective, and people are not hired as a creative director. So the brand owner handling from finances to sales to creative direction to casting of the model to budgets,
Yeah.
and they lose perspective on things. And then in that case, when you have so much to do, obviously your visual communication falls really lower in the priority. So
Yeah.
they don't give enough budget to it, they don't understand why is it so important and why I have to take a massive risk like that. But now I think it's changing because
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole new creative direction, has become a whole new career which I didn't think it existed 2 years ago. It was
Yeah.
stylist and photographer, and
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying. And
Yeah.
the even stylists, I know a lot of designer who don't even use stylist and creative director. The designer themselves like sort of style the campaign.
Hmm.
So that new perspective have to come in order to stand out right now, because that we have amazing set of creative stylists and director in the country right now, and they have their very own very strong voice, like Nidhi or Nikhil
Yeah.
Mansata. And same with photographer, there is Berman, there is Ashish, there is Bharat. So when
Yeah.
a brand collaborates with them, and these are smart people who worked with a lot of brands before, so they know how to take your brand and keep the border of the brand intact, but at the same time push it to a level that they talk about personal work of those artists as well. So I
Yeah.
think it's very important for a brand to open up and involve those creative inside and let them have that freedom of sort of take it ahead. And I think online is a great platform right now because it doesn't cost anything to put it out there. Like you
Hmm.
don't have to pay a couple of lakhs to a magazine or put out a hoarding or print. So for them, the budget in
Yeah.
a way that, okay, let's do it, and if it doesn't work out, we are not losing too much. So
Hmm.
that sort of approach to it has also become very easy for us to have that kind of budget. And yeah, but I'm sure like for as when when a magazine sort of see all of this thing happening, that because when you create an imagery for a magazine which is so much more different than imagery for a brand, and every month having like 3 to 4 fashion shoots and
Hmm.
incorporating the brands into it.
Hmm.
And I wanted to ask you that how would you select a set of brands and attach it, like for example, sorry, to make it easier and make it more understandable, when you separated yourself from the magazine and you start taking a smaller brand and digital content,
Hmm.
so how that DNA of that brand, older brand, you've taken up and you've taken it further to a social media, because I know a lot of brands don't even have strong social media right now.
Yeah.
So creating a very strong social media, and at the same time creating social media within your company. So Goose has maybe 4 to 5 brands. So how to specify those brand from each other, because both of us are from fashion and we both work with fashion people more or less. So
Yeah.
creating a identity different for a brand, and the second person has to be completely different from each other. And where do you, because you are Instagram and you as a personality also has a very strong voice. So
Mm.
how to maintain that voice into each brand, and at the same time every brand has to stand different from each other. How do you maintain that sort of identity?
Yeah. So, I think actually the two of us approach brand building very differently. Your approach is much more integral to the brand, in the sense of what you had said earlier about getting involved. You're not just involved in the campaign, you're not just involved in the visual identity, right? Sometimes you're involved in the clothing, you're involved
Yeah.
in the references that a brand uses to create, or that inspire a designer to create a line. So I feel like your role is much more integral to a designer. Um, all we do, I mean, as a content creator, we want to tell the story of the brand, not just through visuals, but through everything, right? We want to communicate the story of the brand. It's what I was saying earlier to you, that this is the generation of, well, not even millennials now, it's Gen Z, right? And they're obsessed with storytelling. They're obsessed with the ethics of a brand. They're obsessed with the values of a brand. What are they really buying into when they spend money on a piece of clothing? It's no longer just, and that comes back to what you had said about having a cause as well. It's no longer just that I'm buying this designer and wearing them for this event. It's also, okay, if you're buying into that designer, what are you really buying into? What does that designer
Yeah.
stand for? Are they sustainable? Are they focused on gender equality? I mean, there could be, so, like, for example, Ito could be worn by men or women, right?
Yeah.
So it comes down to how a brand positions itself, and that's what we do. We really tell that story, not just through visuals, which is your core strength, but through all their communications. So it's about standardizing, it's about giving a brand a voice, which again, it may not have, the designer might not entirely be sure
Yeah.
of what that is. But when you work with a brand over a few seasons, you start to understand really what it stands for. And I feel like you're able to communicate it better and better. And I mean, social media has become the biggest tool to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Earlier, we used to rely on print media, we used to rely on
Yeah.
other forms of media to tell that story. But now you can tell that story directly to your
To your
customer.
consumer. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's so powerful, right? I mean, it's um and that actually brings me to my next question, which is, do you think it's more important for a brand to be, and we look at a couple of designers to really like get a sense of this, but do you think it's more important for a brand to be consistent every season? Like, for example, Sabyasachi, right?
Yeah.
Such a strong brand. The visual identity of the brand, I mean, whether you love it or not, you can't deny that when you look at an image, you know that that's Sabya.
Yeah.
And the way he has done it is that he has very clearly, consistently stayed with a
Yeah.
specific kind of story, whether it's the ensemble cast of a wedding, whether it's the way that each of those women is shot against a floral backdrop or
Yeah.
whatever in a certain pose. He has been consistent with that, with every collection that he's done, and a little bit of playfulness here and there, and all of that. But so that's one way of doing it, right? And then you have, like a Raw Mango to mention, like a Lovebirds. They're constantly experimenting. They're constantly trying something new with each campaign that they do. Which do you think is more effective for a designer?
So, in my opinion, I think still Raw Mango, Sabyasachi, and Lovebird. I still feel that they are telling the same story in a larger format. Sabyasachi might be creating similar visual, but even Raw Mango is someone who's talking a very relatable, nostalgic feeling. When you see an image over the course of 3-4 years, You see your parents into it, you see your grandmother, your mother into it brings out the nostalgia, the way people wear sari. And it could be just the product itself is very nostalgic and it comes from very old school era. And so is love, but there is a sense of melancholy into each picture. The girls are very simple and stuff like that. But answering to a question, I think I feel that creating that larger identity is very difficult, which is consistent, but at the same time, it's safe and boring, which in a way works.
Yeah.
So for someone like Sabyasachi, it's amazing what he built the identity, and it's very relatable. Each time you see it, and there's a stamp. The moment you touch that image from any angle, whether it's production, whether it's casting, whether it's photography idea, whether it's clothing, you know that you're getting into a space which is not your space if you touch that space of Sabyasachi. Raw Mango also has created something similar for itself.
For Raw Mango, let's even look at a couple of campaigns that you've styled. Cloud People, for example, has a very different feel from here, right? The one,
Yeah, yeah.
like completely different. So yes, it's still, I mean, the story is the same, but the visuals are
The
very, very,
visuals are different.
yeah,
But I'm thinking and I'm talking about brands who change their identity very quickly every season. And I think right now, especially with what's happening with the world right now, I feel that brand has to chill out for a bit and adapt to whatever is coming next. So tomorrow we are talking about sustainability. Okay, let's work on it, because the world is changing so fast and our needs are changing so fast. To remain the same thing, like, okay, think about a brand who's been consistent, like Louis Vuitton has been consistent for so many years, or someone like Sabyasachi. In times like that, if you don't change your communication with your consumer, you almost feel like, are you blindsided, or like, have you closed your eyes to this time?
yeah,
And then I feel very wrong. Like when the LGBTQ law got lifted from the country, it was such a major time for fashion, and no fashion brand has took a stand apart from Manish Arora very recently and spoke about it. And especially fashion being such a big part of the community.
yeah.
So I feel that when you lose such a big aspect of cultural and political changes, you sort of, I personally feel it's dishonest to the brand. So I do look at brands who are really young. And also, I mean, we had a conversation separately before, me and you, that the current state of everyone's mind is confusion from last 2 years, 3 years since social media has come on board. We don't know whether we are healthy. We don't know what's good for us, what's bad for us. Someone will tell us, okay, do this today, and we'll start doing it. And someone will say, no, this was a myth. Now let's jump onto the new thing. So we have been, especially millennial, has been a part of this confused state of mind when the world is telling them what to do. Social media is telling them what to do, and we're adopting product according to that. We're eating habits, our exercising habit, our communication with other people has so much of confusion. And I think the young brand has to come and celebrate that confusion, and that will be way more connected to a consumer than, okay, this is about this is the language I've been talking, and I'm going to talk to the same language till rest of the time to come.
Yeah.
And not just the language, but they have to keep developing new products, like, which is just good for the current time. Like maybe do free size clothing, because we are trying to be, as an industry, to be as inclusive as we can. And we are trying really hard with magazines, with couple of brands, but like the product has to change itself in order for everyone to adapt to it. So those kind of changes has to come. And I think a brand who can change constantly and bring freshness, and that can be the USP of the brand, that their constant thing is they keep changing, so that they are constant in making changes constantly. So I
Yeah.
think they both are important. One is a legendary brand which is creating that very strong DNA from the scratch, and
Yeah.
one could be one segment can be the brand who are constantly changing and serving what is right now and current. And what I see very good thing about that is that when, like internationally also, when Riccardo Tisci went to Burberry or Givenchy, the complete language has changed. When
Please.
Phoebe left Celine, and
No,
so
not to
yeah,
mind.
I know. So even the bigger iconic legendary fashion house also sort of allow, and Gucci has completely shifted from Tom Ford to,
Yeah.
yeah. And so
You're right.
even those are talking current languages. They're talking about, making those huge changes in the complete consumer base has shifted. And this is very need of the hour, that the brand doesn't have to be stagnant and digged into this is who we are and we can't change it no matter what happens in the world. And I don't feel that kind of respect towards a brand like that, I always feel they are leaving a complete group of segment of people who actually have put effort to change, which is a
Mm.
great thing. And you're not serving them anymore because this is not who we are.
Mm.
And I also feel that fashion brand and designers have the first hand responsibility to jump onto change, then coming much later. Because right now, what's happening, music industry, film industry are talking way more ahead in time than fashion is. We are talking about the community, the body positivity, or about diseases or like natural disaster much way more ahead than fashion is, and fashion adapting much later to the situation. We are so fickle. The whole point of having 20 fashion shows a month and 12 issues of a magazine, that every month we can talk about new language and
Yeah.
bring up a new topic, but not doing it is sort of missed opportunity for me.
Mm.
And that's the reason I feel that we always have to keep ourselves updated with what's happening and how to translate that political idea into fashion. And
Yeah.
that is very important for us to understand, translate that, find a way to transfer that energy into a point where it's a sellable product. And I think that's something which I'm also working on currently, and I'm also trying to see that how I can translate that idea into. So I've done it a lot with editorial work, and
Yeah.
I'm sure you have done it a lot with editorial work, but
Yeah.
it's very hard when it comes to working with a brand and
Yeah.
convincing them to take a topic so risky and so bold and be the first person to do it. And they're still scared, because I've seen when someone really accepts the idea and do it, they always receive a great applause from people or certain amount of that particular crowd. But they're still very like, no, a danger spot and a safe spot, they'll always choose a safe spot.
Yeah.
They
Always.
always do that.
Yeah.
And
Which are, sorry to interrupt. I was just going to ask, which are some of the international brands that you think have created really strong visual identity for themselves and have kept evolving?
I really feel that someone like Balenciaga has done a great job with their visual identity, especially their Instagram, because they don't talk. The fun part is that when you go onto a brand, you don't really understand what's happening with this. They're not selling the product there. I mean, if guys have not checked it out, please check Balenciaga's Instagram. It's like a crazy world. It's like the alien people coming in doing their things. And when you see their campaign, then you see their shows, then you see the product itself, and you see that, oh God, that's a larger story coming together. And that's why it's so odd and
Yeah.
it's so unique to it. And at the same time, the DNA of the brand remain intact. The shapes of the brand, the fabrics of the brand remain intact. And that for me is a very strong language a brand has. And the second brand is Jill Sander, which is very romantic, has been very nostalgic, has
Hmm.
been worked with classic idea of beauty. And with current moving time, they have kept that keywords exactly the same, but moved into their visual identity very, very differently. Now they don't have products sometime in the campaign, but that nostalgic cinematic value of the brand always remained the same. To someone what me and Aishwarya has discussed previously was Jacquemus, who
Love.
has who has taken that region of France and made it into a thing, and he talks about his personal life, his partner, his family, and the product which is coming
Huh.
from France and Provence. And
In fact,
that's
sorry to interrupt, all the brands that you mentioned just now, I think the one thing they have in common is that none of them are selling product,
they are
right?
not. They're
Yeah.
not.
And that's what is most interesting about them.
Because I think consumer now, they know what the product is. There are multiple ways to see the product, and product is coming on their show. They're promoting products on their stores, their online stores for them, but there's no way for a brand to tell a story. How do you
Yeah.
say tell a story? Fashion has a format. It's a place where you have to follow a sort of line, and how to be different with existing brand which is competitive to you. So social media has become a platform that you can talk whatever you want and
Yeah.
not follow any format. You're so free there. And does I think uh, that's going to play such a strong important part in creating
Yeah.
new language and
And
open it up.
designers would understand that, because I feel like one of the places that we're stuck in India with designers is that they still only see social media as a vehicle to sell their clothes. When it can and should be so
Yeah,
much more. And I think that's something that I mean that's a mindset change that's going to have to come slowly, hopefully more and more now.
yeah, and it's just immediate results is what I feel is the problem, because they get 5 orders a month on their DM, and they're like, oh, we are selling 5 products a month on the website, but they don't see that on a larger context, they can connect to a whole new crowd which they've never touched by creating a very strong language. And of course, we are, and I'm sure you really know that how stingy they become when it comes to spending money on social media. They will
It's
build a
really bad.
store.
Oh, I can't
They'll
see
get
it.
like they get a big celebrity to walk the show, never give that kind of money to social media and adjust to the budgets. And
Yeah.
how do you deal with that? Like how do you still face this problem from bigger to smaller brands?
Oh boy.
And how
I,
do you actually put the value? Like, what do you say to them to sort of make them realize the value of social media?
hmm. Well, see, oof, it's a challenge. I'll tell you that. I mean, whether it's a big brand or a small up and coming brand, all the money goes towards producing the clothes, right? All the money that they want to spend on their brand is towards creating the product. Now, I think that the younger brands see the value of social media. I think they understand the power of social media. Uh, I find that a lot of the slightly older brands still only want to see it as, okay, we need to show this kurta, we need to
Yeah,
show this
yeah.
lehenga. And I mean, I wish I could say that I've dramatically changed the minds of many people, but I haven't, and it's difficult, Kshitij. I mean, it's either you get it,
I can imagine totally. Yeah,
yeah, either you get it because you're in the world, and I mean, all of us spend hours every day on social media, right?
yeah,
If you don't see the power of that to communicate a message about your brand, if you can't have a long-term vision for your brand to say that, okay, this, you're building something, it's not just selling
yeah,
5 dollars, so unless a designer can understand and see that, it's just not going to happen. Like I
yeah.
mentioned these 3 brands to you, Indian brands, but when I was trying to think of other Indian brands that have a really strong visual identity, I couldn't. Which are
Yeah,
the,
me neither. Me
you know,
neither.
what are they? I mean, we have so many designers. We have some massively successful designers. We have so many young designers, the next generation designers. Where where is this? Where is the
It's and it's
experimental strong? Where is it?
and it's so funny you are saying that, because whenever I'm traveling outside of the country, and of course fashion people are not really that exposed to Indian fashion and Indian designer. So when I talk about designer, the first place I go is, of course, oh, look at this designer I'm trying to show, because the craft is really good. Like, for example, Sabyasachi or Rohit Bal or Anamika, that their embroidery is beautiful. But and a lot of other young designers who is doing great work in streetwear, great work in doing sustainable outfit with the wool, with the community. And when I try to show it to the world and I go out and open their social media, like, this is the designer, is like, whatever you're saying doesn't really come across on their social media. And I was like, no, trust me. And sometimes I'll be wearing something from those designs. They'll be like, oh my God, this is so beautiful. And like, I want to find this designer. And they get really disappointed by looking at the social media. So, and also I think people, because the whole purpose of social media is it's such a global platform that you can
Yeah.
connect to anyone in the world,
Yeah.
but the content still remains so serving to India and the consumer in India. There is
That's
another problem, that there's a lot of westernized idea comes down to India, and they filter through it and try to make it Versace looking, try to
This is
make it
one of my
Gucci looking.
like pet
Biggest
peeve.
problem.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. I mean, we have enough in this country to draw from.
Oh, absolutely. Like,
Right?
yeah.
Oof. But this
And that's why
Western concepts or ideas and Indianizing them is just very
is
frustrating.
just frustrating. And that's why I was like, I initially, when I started working, I was like, I have to work on myself as a brand first and create myself an identity, so people will be even not scared, but they'll be like, okay, Kshitij is not good for it. Without even communicating with me, they'll know what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. And the first idea to bring down India as such a strong identity in my work, that when a brand comes to me, they were like, okay, this guy is not going to serve anything apart from India, so let's not even go to him unless you want to do something which is inclusivity, or talking about the country, talking about the craft, talking about a language which is purely Indian and no one else owns it in the world, and make it very specific. So I was okay to not work with 30 brands. One is selling an evening gown, another one is a sari, another one is a face cream or whatever. I was okay to work with 5 brands so I can justify my own branding and my own position on in my talent. So when brand comes to me and they know when they're saying that, okay, but we sell evening gown for girls, so we sell, it could be anything, it could be suits, it could be bikini, like certain area which I can translate, but I don't prefer to translate because I lose my ethics in the bargain.
Yeah.
So, and that become very important for me to not take an idea from a Western country or reference from a Western brand and like, oh, we want to Instagram like this brand. And I was like, no, this is not how it works.
Yeah.
Because, and then I lost a lot of job because of that. I have done in a lot of other people's, I've done a very bad job with the campaign because I bring down this, oh, but this is so desi, this is so like rural and stuff like that. You know what I'm saying? When I'm sure when you were at Ellen, you done some beautiful shoot about India and with dark skin model. I'm sure initially back in the days, they're like, oh, but this girl is so this, that's not really pretty. Where is your Brazilian model with black hair who looks like a... So all of those things, it's coming with the brand now. And I put
changing
down
now.
my foot. Yeah. I was like, I have to create an identity where people are proud of who we are and not talk about what we don't have. And it's really sad part that a lot of designers are following the same ethics what we want them to follow, but the visual identity will not be the same. The craft will be amazing, they'll be doing some amazing textile of saris or lehengas or gowns or whatever, the embroidery is very purely Indian and from India, but they'll try to create this reference of Marilyn Monroe or like Angelina Jolie. And I was like, but you have everything in your product which is talking so good out the country. Why do you have to make your consumer look like, I don't know, Madonna?
Exactly.
So that's something they are really like that white supremacy is really hitting the market. It's changing. I'm not saying it's not changing, but it's still, I see a lot of brand. I was like, the product is so beautiful. Why do you have to be someone else when you're trying to communicate with your consumers? And I think, as you said in the beginning with Elle, that you want to create that language about a free girl and a safe place to be. And to create that language, you've gathered up a whole team of people, which is like Nidhi, Malini, who has this very specific work and very specific to that idea, what you spoke about, a girl who is completely free and she's not an object. And brand have to really understand that celebrating what we have makes them unique, and not just about the country, because we have a lot of designers in the country, but about themselves and their personal story. And I think it's just that they have to stop for a second in times like that and think about what they are and why they started the brand in the beginning, because they tend to forget why they've done it and what was the whole point of becoming a designer.
And I think just when you're involved in the daily process of just creating and
doing
making
things,
you forget the larger picture. You forget that you need to take a slightly macro view, zoom out a little, look at who you are, look at what your brand stands for. And actually, I think that's a great note on which to end this conversation, which is that we do need to look to our surroundings. We need to look at India as a source of endless inspiration. We don't need to go to the West for that. And we need to celebrate who we are as a culture.
Who we are.
And I think...
And that will make us unique. For sure, because what we have, no one else has, and we have that, and we are working with it. So we just have to translate that into a way that we can become more specific and unique and stand on it on our own, rather than looking around and trying to do things which other people are doing. Because that's the first funda of being different: is don't try to do something what other people are doing, which is the first thing they should understand. Should we take some questions now?
Yes, let's.
Sure, great. I do have a few questions here. This is in no specific order. Please bear with that. So there's a question here from Akanksha Bahal. She is doing the post-graduation program in luxury and brand management from the Pune campus. Her question reads, hi, I'm working for a brand with a very minimal aesthetic that appeals to women of all ages from 20 to 60. So how do you suggest building a targeted visual identity that doesn't get lost on social media?
Aishwarya.
Okay. I start off saying that first of all, sorry, I can't see anyone. Can you
guys hear? Better now? Yes, we can.
Okay. So first of all, I'm really happy to hear that that there's a designer who's working with a more minimal aesthetic, and that they're so inclusive in terms of the range of ages that their customer can be. I would say look first of all, first figure out who you are. But a great example of beautiful visual identity is what Kshitij had mentioned earlier of Ito, which is a menswear label. Very clean lines, very deceptively simple clothing. That and the language that brand adopted, this is not necessarily the language for you. It's obviously difficult to say without knowing the designer, without seeing the clothes, what kind of visual identity they should create. But I think that's a great example if you want to look, because the route Kshitij took towards styling that brand was to make it a lot more quiet, a lot more contemplative, a much more intellectual kind of space that he took it in. So I think from Indian brands, that's a good one to look at in terms of another brand that celebrates minimalism and beauty and simplicity. So that's what
Kshitij, do you have anything to say to that?
Yeah, I mean, she's completely right. Even someone like Bodis was create like quite a simplistic approach to campaigning and like a talking point when you don't have to know too much about the story of it, but the visual identity is so strong it talks for itself. So I think, yeah, I mean, I agree with her.
Right. And on the contrary, what are your views on brands like Valentino? This question comes from Abhishek Das.
I didn't
On
hear that. Valentino, okay.
Yes.
I think they are doing a great job. They are still very romantic. What they embroidery and craft and technique has improved far ahead from what they used to be. I think it's become really, really intricate, and they are working with a lot of communities around Africa and India, I know, to get the embroideries and all done. So I quite like what they're doing. I'm not really aware of their social media right now because I don't think I follow them and I haven't looked into their social media that much. But I like what they're doing with the product.
Right.
I would say, if I could add to that, I would only say that I have seen some of their social media, but their visual identity ever since Maria Grazia left and went to Dior, I have seen that dramatic kind of shift. Yeah, I haven't seen like, okay, now it's, I don't know, the brand is being reinvented or is going to look completely different. So yes, the clothing is beautiful. But in terms of the visual identity, I think I expected more of a stronger, a stronger kind of message when it went from two designers to one, because then the focus of your designs is narrowed, right? So we should have seen more of that. I hope more of that.
But I sort of understand, because when I see Maria doing what she's doing, which is much more softer romantic and like much more like simpler romantic. So I do see that separating from Valentino, because the simplicity kind of got lost and became larger and larger and larger. So you could really see she was the one who was building up soft, simple romance and commercial value to the product. And Piero was doing that big thing and always talking about larger shapes and larger things and that kind of. So you can really see them separating. But yeah, you're right, on social media maybe.
Yeah, because you can see it in the designs. I'm saying.
Yeah, you can't see in the communication.
Yeah. Right. And speaking of brand identity, when brands change their identity, how do you think they keep themselves intact with their story? This question comes from Shaina Randhawa.
A very good question. So when they change their identity, of course, there's a slow change they have to make. So what's happening currently with bigger brands, when they completely change their identity, they just don't change it just by themselves. They always get a creative director or a larger artist on board, and then who you already know. So when Louis Vuitton got, you already knew Off-White. So you would expect what's going to happen to the brand. Or when Riccardo came to Burberry, you already knew Riccardo from Givenchy. So you already know these guys or these creative directors are heavy brands within themselves. So you already expect what changes are supposed to come. So you can easily take that route and no one will blame you for changing so suddenly, or the consumer, because that guy, that person, that brand is bringing their customer base with them. So when you're buying Givenchy, you're just not buying Givenchy. You were also buying Riccardo Tisci. So some people state that, okay, wherever Riccardo goes, I'm going to buy Riccardo's design. Same with someone like Jean Galliano or Tom Ford. There are people who are not fan of the brands, but they're fan of those designers who they are buying into. Yeah. So I think it's something which is and that's why the brand are taking advantage of this. Like Louis Vuitton, a very great example. They are such a classic, such a niche, old brand, almost like Hermes, what Hermes is right now, but bringing Virgil has just completely shifted it, flipped it upside down. So then they bought the whole new age customer for them to realize that this is the need of the hour and this is what we need to do, whether you could like him or not. But that shift was important. No one has questioned Louis Vuitton because, okay, we were expecting this to happen. And if
Right.
it would have been safer, then what would have been, what then it would have been gone wrong. So I think,
I think Kshitij actually makes a really good point, which is that especially when you have a legacy brand, that people are already invested in, that people have already bought into. I mean, you run a risk in the sense of people might accept the change, completely reject it, or people might love it. But I think that people will definitely talk about it, right? So
yeah,
if you want to get conversation started around your brand, and the truth is that with each designer, with each new creative director who has come on board to these massive heritage brands, the brand has changed. They
yeah,
haven't gone to, their one identity. I mean, the clothing has changed dramatically.
completely.
Right.
So the brand, it's not just the brand identity that changes, the brand changes on every level, I think.
Every level. Yeah.
New creative director on board.
And I
Right.
think if you look at like a safer example that how to change it drastically, but at the same time keep your consumer really intact to where it was, then you should look at Margiela at Hermes when he did the part. Then it was so Margiela, but it was so Hermes. So I mean, you can really see the collection difference that it was very him, but at the same time, a consumer of Hermes will remain intact. But there's very less people which are so smart
Yeah.
to get that
Yeah.
change, whether keep the brand intact and still speak the same language. I think Tom Ford is one of them, but and Karl Lagerfeld is of course one of them. Used to like was, but yeah, it's
Yeah,
right
and
now the
Gucci
time
is
is changing and
actually
changing also is good.
Gucci is an excellent example of a brand that
Completely
completely
shifted,
changed
yeah,
its DNA, right? With when
and for
Alessandro,
good, for good,
yeah, for the
for
better.
so good, yeah, yeah.
Right. Kshitij, this next question is for you. It says, how do you balance it out when you're working with a particular brand and you wish to maintain your identity as a stylist too? This is from Dina Khan.
So, guys, this is a very good question. It's a bit of a difficult place you get into sometimes. So I tend to say, and I'm sure a lot of people don't have comfort of saying no when you are young and you're starting off your career. So I worked really hard in the beginning of my career to create a certain identity for myself. So each time someone asks me to do something which is not me, I think back of those time and see that how hard it took me to maintain that aesthetic which people know my work for. And for me to do something which is completely out of my ethics or out of my style, I would generally say no to. And not because of a selfish reason, but I also know that there are people exist in the industry. There are so many stylists, so many amazing creative directors, and they can just do justice to a language which is not my language. So I always suggest them to go to some other stylist or some other person to work, or who can bring a better perspective to their brand than me. And right now, when I'm working as a creative director, I am not styling all the campaigns. So the brand comes to me, we are creating a language, and I feel that, oh no, you know what I'm saying? Like this stylist will do a better job in terms of styling. So let me create the language, but hire this person to do the other work. So
Right.
you
And
have to
how do
say
you
no.
suggest, young talents should go about sort of maintaining their aesthetic, but at the same time ensuring that they kind of build a solid portfolio and, fulfill the brand's requirements? How do they sort of balance this entire process?
So what me and Aishwarya spoke earlier about designers is the same answer I would give here as well. That you have to really understand that why you are doing what you're doing. You can't just, because there are so many students coming every year. Being honest, and it's really hard to create your own niche. And sometimes you can find it immediately after college. Sometimes it can take you 5 years of working and working with every designers and stylist and assisting people to know that this is who I am, this is who I'm not. See,
Right.
this is an area, creative industry is something that we all have to be happy about what we do. So the moment we are not happy with what we are doing, you have to shift and you have to change. It's just, and you have to be fearless while doing it.
Right.
Being freelancer, there's a lot of risk, but there's also a lot of safety and less fear when you leave a job. So you have to be really hard on yourself to understanding who you are and what inspires you the most. And at the same time, analyze the situation by looking around what already exists. and
Right.
how to not do those things. But if you feel that things as they exist and I want to contribute to it, then of course you can create a community with multiple people who are talking the same language, and be a part of that community and push that community further towards that particular aesthetic. So that is
Right.
another way of doing it. So you might not be able to stand out always, but it's good to take a cause. Like sustainability is something, or sexuality is something that one person can't change it, or talking about India is something one person can't change it. We need more people in each area to take it further. So if you relate to aesthetic of a particular person or particular designer, try to work with that community and push your agenda or push your message out there with the whole community, instead of trying to be solo and create something. No, this is, I'm going to be unique, because that rarely happens, that you are the person who's taking it forward, and
Right. And this, I
everything
think,
is
can
so done.
also very much begin right from the time you're within your classroom. I mean, that wouldn't really require you to, wait it out. This can
No,
very
no,
much
no.
happen right from your classroom. You know, there are so many people
Exactly.
who feel with the same sort of cause, and there are so many
Yeah.
communities that you're free to join and volunteer.
In fact, it's a better
So,
place to join in the
Yeah.
classroom, because you don't have risk
Exactly.
to be unprofessional or do a bad job. It's on someone else's cost. You can
right.
learn so much, you can try so many things, and right now with social media and the kind of sessions you are having with professionals, you can really understand what is the right place for you to be. And from there you can start. And I would say much before, it can start much before. You might be from your experience with your family, your experience of your upbringing, there must be something which you really stand for, and just taking it forward and translating into your creative work is something can come up, like can result in beautiful work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. The next question
Thank
is
you.
from Prakshi Patwa. She'd like to know what are the skills and education background that is required to become a creative consultant, and what are the tasks exactly? Okay, there's a bit of a grammatical area. What tasks exactly sort of encapsulate in what you do?
Okay.
Aishwarya.
Yeah, I'll take this one. I would say it really doesn't matter what your educational background is. Um, it matters that you have a voice. It matters that you're fearless, in Kshitij's words. Fashion is, I mean, it's art, right? And art doesn't really, it requires you only to have passion for it. It requires you to have a love for it. It requires you to know the craft, but it doesn't require you to have any particular kind of education in order to achieve it. Even if you don't have the education, you can still achieve it through experience, right? You can work with, whether it's, if you're a designer assisting different designers, if you want to be a stylist, working with a magazine, assisting a stylist whose work you love, working with assisting a photographer whose work you love. So it's about first identifying where you fit in the industry. What are you really bringing to the table? What is different about you? What can you offer that isn't already there? Or maybe you are offering something that is already there, but you're doing it better, or you're doing it differently. Whatever it is, you just need to identify what's unique and special about you. Then you need to figure out which are the professionals in the industry whose work you love. And then you can't just become a creative consultant, right? It takes
Yeah.
many, many years of work, a lot of experience working with many different brands, different kinds of people, in
People. Yeah.
order in order to reach the place where you can then say, okay, I can now be a creative consultant for brands. So I think it's more about finding the right people that you want to work with, just like work. I'm honestly in this particular field, it's really more about hands-on experience than theoretical knowledge. So yeah, that would be my advice.
So I have a very different advice to give, because I have come from a college which is a nightmare, because
Oh
it's
no.
that we I remember multiple nights and a stretch where we've slept for 2 hours finishing project of different area at NIFT and NIDs, known to be the most difficult 5 years of my life, but the most amazing, and I've learned so much from it. And I would say, when I look back and I see everything we've learned, which in college we used to think, oh, what is this thing we are learning, and how is this useful to become anything? And I realized, as Aishwarya said, that working with multiple people in the future after college, but I had seen pattern making has to be perfect, otherwise you'll flunk the college. You have to know draping, you have to know fashion history, you have to know music, you have to know culture, you have to know styling, you have to know photography, you have to know the fashion top 100 fashion film from last 50 years. So all of those things in a very curriculum format has forced us to learn few things. And I look back, I feel that knowing so much has helped me to become a creative director and consultant from a styling perspective, because when creating my team, I would know that, okay, this is photographer's job. So if sometimes someone is moving and not doing the job you want them to do, you have certain experience from your study coming into your professional, which Aishwarya said is working a lot, gives you a perspective on everyone's work and how they are not doing their work properly, or how you can improve them, and how you can even select them more than even changing their idea of work. So I think education played a huge importance in my career, in terms of having that freedom that, okay, if anything goes wrong, I know how to correct it. And
Right.
practicing it constantly. So I still make patterns. When someone say that we don't know how to create that shape, and I remember cutting patterns at a couple of the brands, I was like, no, your trousers are wrong because they're cutting with the jacket pattern, so you have to change it further. So that really comes handy, and it makes you slightly more confident in a room of
Right.
people, and you can talk a little bit about few things. And as you go, of course, your interest takes a part. You're like, okay, you're interested in photography, you automatically know when you're on a set, you know, you're getting interested in the lighting or how the angles are, and you can automatically develop that area and you can be expert at that. But I think it plays quite a big of importance. So if you are looking at becoming a creative director, keep your eyes open when you're studying into everything from film to fashion to politics to
Yeah.
every area. And
Right.
because that's the time you are not putting yourself into risk, apart from risk of time, because you are young, you have not really got into a specific area, so you can really, sorry for my language, fuck around and like see what works for you, and
Yeah.
It's
without
actually
taking any risk.
interesting that Kshitij and I have completely different views on this
Different
because
background, yeah.
because we come from completely different backgrounds, right? Kshitij is actually has a fashion background, so he is able to understand the value of that.
And I
I
have never
don't.
assisted a single person.
Yeah, and that's true. You've never assisted
Oh, wow.
anybody.
Not a single person, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I will say that Kshitij is one of the exceptions and one of the outliers. It doesn't usually work this way. I'm coming from a different place because I don't have a fashion background, so everything I know about fashion history is self-taught or learned on the job. So my point of view on this is very, very different from his. And I think it really comes down to what kind of personality you are.
You
Like
have, yeah.
my background is in film studies. I don't even,
Yeah.
I've had nothing to do with fashion, but my interest in film has kind of informed how I interact with fashion. So I think it's really, it's a
Yeah.
very individual thing.
And there's a small problem, I would say, because there are so many young people who comes to assist me or intern under us, or like with my friends who are other stylists and magazine, and it's a small community where you know everything. You Students need to take things seriously the day they get into colleges, because we are talking to a student in colleges. I would say try to come out of college and then take it seriously, because it's making you money or getting your reputation. It's a very difficult and very wrong approach to work. I think you have to be really serious from the beginning, and you'll save that 4 or 5 years of time in your struggle period to sort of find yourself who you are. Because a lot of people, they're in the industry for 5-7 years and they still don't know who they are, and that really puts them in a place which can get stagnant after a point.
Right. Thank you so much for that. I know we've consumed quite a lot of your time. The questions are still coming in. We'll quickly pick up the last 4 or 5 questions that have already been sent here. The first
Sure.
question is from Davina Chavra. This question says, Zara is one of the biggest retail brands that is applauded by all. According to you, what story do you feel they are conveying?
Did you say Zara?
Aishwarya.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm
Okay.
waiting for this one from Aishwarya.
Oh boy, Zara. I think the message that Zara is communicating is that fashion can be for everybody. Because what are they doing? Essentially, they're taking, well, I mean, they're stealing designs straight off the runway, right? From like just a bunch of different brands. They're tracking trends very, very closely to see exactly what is going to be, what are the biggest trends of the next season or the season after that. And then they're translating that, making those few changes so that it's all legal, and putting that out to a massive audience of people across the world. So essentially they're saying, yes, these are the fashion weeks, they're creating beautiful clothes, the designers are super talented. We're going to take that, we're going to add a little bit of a twist, make something that still is very much inspired by that, but maybe looks a little different, and then we're going to make it available to everybody. So in a way, it really is the democratization of fashion, because now a lot of people who don't really have access to those very expensive designers, very expensive brands, can get the look for much less, right? So in my opinion, that is what Zara stands for. It stands for being trendy, being current, of the moment, and being for everybody.
I love the way you put that across, Aishwarya. Really appreciate that. It's very well said, and it's a kind of a fresher perspective to think of them in that context.
But
I'll pick up.
that doesn't mean you have to be everybody. Try to find something which you don't have to be trendy all the time and be a cheaper version of a designer. Buy something which is more supporting local people, and even if it's slightly more expensive, and be very basic, because this is the change what we are looking for, and we should really be conscious about that area to be
And
less
don't buy
selfish.
Zara.
Especially you are in
now.
fashion, especially you guys, like you should not buy it.
But I think within the classrooms, it becomes more of, the affordability factor for a lot of students. That being said, we're trying to promote a more of a sustainable
Buy less.
environment here.
Buy less. You don't
So
have to buy
yes,
20 t-shirt for 500 rupees. You can buy 3 for, and there are smaller designers and smaller brand which exist in the cities, which you can buy and still have value for money. Not everything is really expensive, especially in India.
I'm quickly going to take up the next question, which is from the post-graduation luxury brand management head of department, Ms. Ankita Brahmi. And she has written, how do brands rule out cultural distortion from brand storytelling? An Indian brand like Nicobar trying to achieve wabi-sabi sensibilities and making collections inspired from Sri Lankan beaches and African tribes? Big question mark.
Can you repeat the first part of the question again? Sorry.
Yes. How do brands rule out cultural distortion from brand storytelling?
Okay. Interesting. Kshitij, do you want to take a stab at it?
Yeah, I do. So, as I mean, someone else recently asked me this question, and I was very honest about this, and not going by the example of Nicobar you've given. I'm not trying to pinpoint any brand, but talking from a larger brand perspective, I think it's a very attention-seeking cry for brands to jump into this culture appropriation and trying to find way to adopt another culture and talking that language and copying other brands. And I do understand to stand out, that's a very easy way to do things, that you pick up something slightly more different and controversial and make it a part of your brand. But as we've discussed in the beginning of this conversation, is that we all have to realize a responsibility apart from the responsibility of just selling the product to your consumer well and being authentic to them. And especially in times like that, especially in India, because we are not a fashion forward country. We are not someone who's been in the fashion business for 200 years, or innately doesn't. Craft does, but trends and fashion doesn't. So we have to respect the whole industry and the consumer setup, and not talk about these topics being senseless completely, and have a sense where it's well studied, well thought out, and project that idea as a knowledge and education, that misleading the whole crowd into a place which is more confusing to them. And right now it's a good time in a way, because a lot of people are out there picking up these points and putting those people, exposing them that this is something which you're doing wrong, which a lot of brand has stopped doing it purely from the fear of getting caught. But it's shameful that they're not doing it from their own mind and their own ethics.
Right.
So I think culturally, and we, again, as we said, there's so much original stuff to offer from India and from the brand perspective, and they all have such individual identity. They should just give it some time and find that, and then project that, instead of going and stealing someone else's cultural identity from some other countries.
Yeah, I feel like cultural distortion, I think, was the word she used.
Yes.
It's so tricky, because as an artist, you should be able to be inspired by anything, right? So because we're all living in a global, really, the world is becoming smaller and smaller. So as an artist, I don't want to feel that I'm restricted in what inspires me to create something. However, that said, I find that a lot of brands that borrow from different cultures, they're essentially watering it down, and in many ways. One, they're either watering it down 2, they're maybe exoticizing that culture in order to sell product, or 3, they're making it reductive. You know, it's like you're taking an entire culture and then you're just making it about this one thing. Or even if it's wabi sabi, you're taking an entire way of life almost and just channeling it into creating products to sell. So I think that's where the discomfort kind of sets in as a consumer, that I don't just want to buy a little piece of Sri Lanka to keep in my house. But you know, ideally I would like to go to Sri Lanka and buy something. And that may not be possible for me, but this kind of essentialization where you're just filtering everything down, you're taking this big, huge, varied cultural experience and just kind of making it one note. I think that to me is dangerous, really, because you're yeah, go on, Kshitij.
So for me, and I think Aishwarya, I think last time we spoke at Soho House, there was this topic of Gucci and the turban has also come up. And I'm going to again answer that thing saying that, you know, don't be scared to go to other culture just because it's a risky thing to do or a dangerous thing to do, because everywhere there is a safe zone and there is a zone which you should not touch, because a lot of cultural aesthetic thing which come from culture comes from a very larger story than it just being one thing. For example, turbans. I'm sure if there's any Sikh student, they would understand it's a part of a massive struggle of them being in the war and how it used to be safeguarding their head from getting hit by a sword. So there is story to every object which is aesthetic. And you have to understand that someone has really owned and gained that power to own that aesthetic for their own, and you can't just take it from them and wear it, because it comes from a much larger struggle and much larger story. And a lot of that culture for African American people has a lot of aesthetic value which they adapt to, uh, whether it's corn roses or whether it's creating afro in the hair. It's a larger story which you should study regardless of whether you're going to adapt it in the future or not, and see how to find a way to be respectful to it, and what to pick up and what not to pick up. And same with sexual context at this point, because we all have to talk those languages, but to be very specific and clear what you cannot touch and what you can touch. So get into the zone, study each area what you want to pick up, and some place you can be a part of it and pick those areas up. But some languages you should completely, you have no authority to go through it, because you are taking the whole struggle of a culture of multiple years and just trying to be cool and fashionable by doing it. It's something you should not do. Like a lot of time, bindi is something which is an easy way. You can adopt bindi and every culture can. So because it talks about a pride movement and we want everyone to enjoy that part. But burqa you can't, because it's a struggle. It's something which is like ghungat you can't. So you have to study every aspect of this aesthetic and see where they're coming from, and whether you can mold your aesthetic into it, or you should completely stay away from it, because it's a struggle and a fight people have won over to get to a point where they can really use it for themselves. So study it properly before you don't completely reject it, because you're an artist and you have all the freedom to explore every area, but understand where your limits are in order to adopt culture appropriation in that term. And I'm not talking as a brand perspective, as I'm talking to you as students, and how you should not be scared of adopting it, but like be very, very careful when you're doing it. And talk to people in that community, talk to a person who is Sikh, talk to a person who is Chinese, talk to a person who is African, and understand that is it okay? Because a lot of time people ask me, is it okay for me to post this, and I'm posting these pictures from India? It's not talking about slum, or it's not like demoralizing or making it look. And a certain, I was like, no, who said this to you? It's very good, go ahead and do it. A lot of foreign people or foreign photographer. So it's really about understanding the culture and then taking a decision on it.
Right. On a lighter note, the last question for the day is for Aishwarya. This question is from Aisha, and she would like to know what inspires your Instagram stories, because they are so much fun.
Gosh, okay.
I was waiting for the question. I was like, why is no one asking Aishwarya about her Instagram story right now?
Oh no. Okay, really, honestly, it's just it's a space for me to I guess, as I see it, talk about the things that people are not talking about. You know, we're very politically correct. We're very careful to not hurt anyone's feelings. We're very careful to not say anything that might be taken the wrong way by somebody. And that's important. I mean, it's important to be kind to each other. It's important to be nice. But I think sometimes it's also important to make fun of ourselves. It's also important to look at a piece of art and say, okay, maybe we kind of screwed up there, you know, or maybe this could have been done differently, or maybe this issue could be tackled in a more sensitive way. So to me, it's a way of deconstructing the world around me. It's a way for me myself to understand my thoughts, whether it's on a book or a film or, you know, a social movement. And I guess really provide some context. We're very, very fortunate to have platforms like social media where we can say what we think, where we can be unfiltered, where we don't have to go through another mode of publication for people to hear us. Of course, that comes with responsibility, but I think it's an opportunity to really be yourself. Where do you get that chance otherwise to completely be yourself, and everyone has to deal with it.
No,
so I think
but
that's where I'm coming from.
I would add on to it, but Aishwarya is being very modest here, but we needed someone like that in the industry from a long time, and not like a diet sabya who you don't know who we are, because when Aishwarya says something, it comes from a place of knowing things really well and then commenting on it. And it's not always so I think whenever she says something about politics or fashion in particular, and when she says it, you really think that, okay, this person knows what she's talking about. So you don't take it as a gimmick. And I think that needed to happen, and I think that's why it's much more respected and fun to read it, because it's a well thought of commentary on something which is completely right, at the same time quite fun.
Thank you.
And for the last segment of the masterclass, Kshitij, we have a little surprise for you. Sai, would you like to put on your camera?
Wait,
Yeah,
do
I
need
think
to
it's on.
Sai, we can't see you.
Oh, really? Can you see me right now?
Yes,
Oh,
now we
I can. I know you.
Hi, Kshitij. How are you?
How are you? How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. I'm back in my village. I'm very excited when I got to know that you're going to do this webinar.
I didn't know, and you can't reveal the secret right now, what you've done.
No, I'm
because
not doing that for sure.
But
I'm not
does
doing
give
that for
some
sure.
context to
we've
this?
shot-
How do you know each other?
So basically, he has modeled for a story which we recently shot to a project Aishwarya know and a big part of. And
Oh, really?
yeah. It's a very long story which we'll all know. And so right before quarantine, we shot a very beautiful story with him. And I think probably one of the story which I've waited for a long time to do and found the right time to do it. And I didn't know that you're a part of this. Oh, this is amazing.
Yeah. And do you know what? Good thing is we did before COVID. That's a great thing. Now I don't think there was any chance of doing.
And I'm so happy that no one can do it again, because I really want to have a stamp on that.
Oh my God, I'm dying to
we are
see
so
it now.
lucky.
I will call you Aishwarya. You know about it already. You just don't know what I'll.
And personally, I really adore Kshitij for the kind of work he does, and really bow down for what he does all the time.
So
He
much.
literally amazes everyone for the kind of work he does. And see, I have two questions for both of you, for Kshitij and Aishwarya. First question for Kshitij is, when we're talking about brand identity, and as a brand consultant, you have your own identity, right? When I talk about your aesthetics or your identity, I can say like about India, the kind of culture, color, or shapes and sizes, whatnot. It's beautiful aesthetics to be say. And when a brand has more commercial elements, and how and their the kind of their identity is different. And when you both want to collaborate together, I mean, mostly like when brand want to collaborate with you as
I
a
understand
brand
what you're saying.
yeah. And see, sometimes it's very tricky that you as a brand consultant, you shouldn't lose your identity, and as a brand, they might not want to lose their identity.
I'll tell you one thing, and it's a very basic thing I'm gonna say, which you don't have to think throughout every time you're getting a project, and how to ask a question again each time you're getting a job, is that as an artist or as a brand or as anyone who's producing, we are generally talking to people, and people have emotions when they are they are involving themselves into anything. So when you work with basic emotion of people, what they like, what they dislike, their vulnerability, what they get excited by, what they get repulsed by, and when you take
Yeah.
that aesthetic, that what they really want to see, then you sort of forget what you are doing. You could be a chef, you could be an astronaut, you could be a creative director, you could be a brand, you could be I don't know, cell phone company. It's all about creating that emotions in terms of your work. And when you hit that nail really hard in your work and find that way to translate emotions for other people to connect to, we have been doing it with films. You watch a film and you cry, you listen to a song, you feel happy. It's just lacking in art and fashion. It's not lacking, but very few people are doing it well. So when you find that idea of translating the emotion and connect people with that emotion, then your all your questions can be answered by that.
I think that's really a, I don't think anyone can simplify it in that simple way. That's really beautiful. Thank you, Kshitij. And
Thank you
my
so much.
second question for both Kshitij and Aishwarya is that as a in an editorial perspective and as a brand perspective, why both of them doesn't wanna move out of their comfort zone? Why they don't wanna talk more than what their identity is? See, like when we all are talking about Gucci, how Gucci talks about gender fluidity or how they make political statements, but when coming to Indian brands, they're more want to be in the box, and they more want to and
Sorry. Yeah.
why they really want to do that? Is that anything that influencing both the editorial perspective and as a brand? Why they really don't want to come out of their boxes?
I would say that it's really, I mean, it's a really simple answer. It's business. At the end of the day, a brand wants to sell to as many people as possible, right? And
Yeah,
so they will adopt the safest route in order to be able to do that. So
yeah,
if they took a stand on an issue, if they, for example, took a stand on gender fluidity, or if they took a stand on sexuality or whatever it is, if they take a stand on an issue where there are some people for it and some people against it, then
yeah,
you're alienating a whole segment of your audience, right?
yeah,
Because
yeah,
I mean, there are two ways to look at it. One is to say, okay, I'm going to be one step ahead, and regardless of whether people like it or not, I'm going to make the statement and I'm on the right side of history. Eventually, people are going to come around to it. But
yeah,
on the other side of it, there's, okay, but if I do this, it will make these people uncomfortable. If suddenly, if I've had a very safe, staid, image of a traditional woman in a lehenga, to mix that up and make it more modern,
yeah,
then I might be alienating all the people who have already bought my lehengas and who may want to buy my lehengas, right? So that's really the reason that brands don't want to take a risk.
yeah,
They're afraid that they will lose sales. They're afraid that they will lose a big part of their audience, and so they want to make sure that nobody's offended, make sure that nobody's for or against anything, be completely neutral. That is what most brands want, because that's the safest way to make sales.
yeah. Because why I'm asking this, because when brand has larger voice, they can change the perspective of people. How do they think about different shapes, or maybe
Sure.
about the gender
Yeah,
fluidity?
I know what you're
No?
saying, but like
Yeah,
brands are there to sell first, and
Yeah.
yeah,
even if they're taking because there are places like magazines and publications in fashion for that. So brand
yeah,
doesn't want to take that stand, and whenever they do, it's never a radical change or like a spontaneous decision. It's a very well thought of decision to go for a message like that. So they never
yeah,
be like, okay, this is happening, let's jump onto it. It's a very well discussed, very
Yeah,
well
it's a
thought of
strategy.
business decision.
Yeah.
It's a strategy, it's always a strategy. And it a lot of time it has to do with the personal experience of the person who owns the brand. Maybe
yeah,
LGBTQ or body positivity or gender or nationality, it comes from a
mm,
personal experience which they are fighting. So when they believe strongly into something, and I respect those kind of people who bring in their personal message and agenda to a brand, and you're like, I'm gonna be happy in doing what I'm doing. So because I am this person, and I am another person when I jump onto my brand. So when you meet a person, you're like, oh, this is the person which when you see a brand and you see a person behind it, like for Gucci, for example, the guy is that. He is camp. He's amazing. He's so free, and so when you say, oh, I know why Gucci looks like that. And sometimes you feel that, oh, you are the brand owner and you are the creative director behind that brand because you are so different from each other. So both is a different scene. And I think it's just eventually what works for the brand is what they take a step. No one is stupid enough to just jump on a concept and shut down the brand, because that's not the brand's responsibility to, I mean, it should be, but it's not their prime focus and first idea to talk about a topic. First, they have to sell and then serve their consumer. They should not be failing at that.
Do both things together. That's beautiful.
Yeah, if they can, that's amazing.
Perfect.
Thank you
Thank you
guys.
so very much.